Dana, fantastic to have you here today. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Katie. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation.
Same here. And I know that one of your core areas of expertise is around radical reset. What
Yes.
would you say is behind this term of radical reset?
What is behind the term of radical reset is really being resilient. It has given me ups and downs. And if you're not really radical in your ability to reset and take those as opportunities, I see those things, I think it's a matter of perspective, right? So every time I've been knocked down, I could either stay there or I can get up. And, I choose to see those things as opportunities versus as losses. I feel like I can learn something in each of those particular lessons in life. And so I kind of, look at it that perspective. I've had a lot of them. I've had a lot of them. So, and some of them have not necessarily been easy. My seventh child passed away. It will be almost 25 years ago. That was something that I had to reset from because I had six other children that needed me to be their mom and to be fully present in their lives. I've divorced after 33 years. I've reset there. I walked away from a corporate opportunity because I was politely asked to leave because they were making a shift in the ecosystem. And so I also had to shift. And so those things could have taken any one of them could have taken my knees out, right? But I chose to look at that as an opportunity to pivot. It was a fork in the road. So it was radical resets.
Those are wonderful examples of exactly the sort of circumstances that can make people feel totally beaten down. And of course,
Mhm.
initial grief or disappointment is part of the process and part of resilience. I think this is a conversation that isn't had enough. That resilience doesn't mean being overly positive 24/7. It means allowing yourself to go through that cycle, but being able to bounce back up. What would you say are some of these stages of radical reset? So, someone listening today who's maybe going through a challenging phase and thinking, okay, I really want to rise from it and learn and grow and not let it beat me up, but they're struggling to get back on their feet. What
Mhm.
would you say are some of the steps they need to go through?
I think the first thing, like you said, is really just holding space for your feelings. I think oftentimes we don't give ourselves permission to feel. We want to, quickly move to the next thing, right? And I think it's really important to give yourself the time and the space necessary to feel all the feelings because they're very valid. And oftentimes other people won't hold space for you. You have to hold space for yourself. And so I think that's the most important is doing that, giving yourself that permission. If it means sitting on the sofa eating the ice cream, whatever the thing is that helps you feel the feelings, do the thing. And then once you have felt the feelings, then you can kind of go, okay, you can take a deep exhale and you can kind of go, okay, now I'm ready. And then you can decide what it is you're looking to do. Where do I want to go from here? So clarity is key. You can't get clear if you haven't felt the feelings. And so you need to feel the feelings so you can get clear. And then once you're clear, you can create a plan for, okay, this is where I want to go. And now I can create a plan on how I can get there. But it's really, I think it's those three things in that order.
Feel the feelings. This is also something that's mentioned in the book, The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing books for those listening who haven't read it. Feel the feelings. So wonderful. And in this sort of three steps that you were discussing afterwards, once we've felt all our feelings and sort of went through that phase and gotten clarity on what we want and put a plan in place, how can we then pivot? Because sometimes as you start to take action on these plans,
Mm-hmm.
maybe things don't work out. And we were talking a bit before starting the podcast. You're
Yeah.
laughing because they often don't work out. Before starting the podcast, we were discussing how we need to pivot a lot nowadays, both whether you're an employee and you've been laid off, or if you're a business owner and things ongoing as
Mm-hmm.
well with the company, or because of AI, or all these different things. So, how can we learn to pivot?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to understand that when things don't work out, it's not a no, right? It's not a defeat. It's really a perspective, right? It's a lesson that you're learning, and every last point, every last lesson you learn is a bit of data, and it helps you to reinforce and tweak and make the adjustments necessary. Being an entrepreneur for me, yeah, I've learned a lot. I've pivoted a lot, Katie. And everything did not work out all that as I envisioned it initially. And, I had to feel the feelings that I felt in that moment. Some of that was disappointment and frustration. And then I got clear on what's the goal, right? Repeat that process. And then I looked at what did I learn? What were the valuable lessons that I learned in this failure? I'll use that term, that phrase. What did I learn? And how could I take that lesson and really apply it so that I could then rinse and repeat, right? And move forward from there. So there's a lot of what's the word? There's a lot of gold in the lessons, right? There's a lot of gold that you can glean from those lessons, but we have to reframe our relationship with failure. Very much like we have to reframe our relationship with rejection. Failure is not a defeat. It is really just an opportunity for you to learn a lesson so that you can tweak it, you can make the necessary pivots and adjustments, and you can move forward. But if you don't adjust your relationship with failure, you will stay stuck.
This is something that I've seen with many founders that I work with and in general in the entrepreneurial scene is many people have this crippling fear of either rejection or failure or both. And
Mm-hmm.
so what you're saying here makes total sense on a rational, logical perspective. I've spoken the same about this, understanding the failure just is lessons, having an experimental mindset. But sometimes on the emotional level, it's still not felt that way. Somewhere in the subconscious, due to past traumas or society or personality type, we take failure very at heart. And even if we try all the coaching and perspectives and all these tools, it still hits us and we struggle to move past it. How
Mm-hmm.
do you support leaders, or founders, or entrepreneurs who have this crippling fear of failure and who, when they then fail at any given project, struggle to move past it?
I've been there, right? And I think that's the other thing is like when you've been there, you can really hold space and empathize with them and where they are in their journey. For me personally, it was having to forgive my past versions of myself that made those decisions. And so it's really helping them to understand you did with the best knowledge and information you had at the time. It doesn't make it wrong. It doesn't make it bad. It just makes it what is. And you have to forgive that other version, that past version for whatever you're holding on to. And so it's really being able to do that for yourself and be kind and gentle and gracious and give yourself grace because you've learned from that. And it's that trauma is keeping you stuck. And so in order to move past it, you definitely have to heal it and forgive it.
This is fascinating. It resonated so deeply with me in multiple moments where I realized that I was still in a victim mindset position, but not victim of other people or circumstances, but of my past behavior. And I remember thinking, this is so twisted, but it's true. It's if we are someone who prides ourselves in taking ownership and who's maybe gone through a journey of personal development, then we know not to blame circumstances or other people or the weather or the economy. And therefore, when things aren't going well, one of the defaults is to blame ourselves. And sometimes this is on a subconscious level. We're not consciously aware we're blaming ourselves. And when we become consciously aware, that's when we can pivot because that's when we can think, well, what's done is done. What have I learned?
Mm-hmm.
Can I have the compassion and forgive myself for the actions I took or didn't take? And what can I do from here? But until we forgive, that's like a weight that holds us back from moving forward.
It's so true, Katie. So true. And it hope for me, unforgiveness in any form I feel it in my body. There's a book called The Body Keeps Score. And that was reading that book was such an eye opening aspect for me. Um, and my massage therapist. I will say that because I had a standing appointment for 2 hours to work out the same knots every 2 weeks that were kept rinsing and repeating. And I went through this whole forgiveness exercise. And when I remember completing this journey, forgiveness journey, it was like a 40-day forgiveness journey. And I remember going in for my appointment and she's like, what have you done? I'm like, what do you mean? And she goes, the knots that I have been working on with you for 5 years are not here anymore. What have you done? And I'm like, and tell her about this forgiveness journey that I've done, for this 40-day forgiveness journey. And she was like, I am so happy for you at how you've released this at a cellular level. And it blew my mind. It blew my mind.
It's incredible, incredible. The number of things that go on in our body and the way they hold on to emotional and patterns and traumas, and how sometimes working on the body through even things like a yin yoga class can
Hmm.
release things in our mind or subconscious level, or working on our mind or subconscious or through meditation or spirituality can then heal the body, and how it's all interconnected. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I know that before we got on today's episode, you spoke of this idea of staying ready. I'd love to hear your perspective on this and why it's so important when we come back to this topic of pivoting.
Yeah. So I think what happens is especially from an entrepreneur perspective, we kind of get into business and we have our vision on what it is we're building and why we're building it and who we're meant to serve. But oftentimes we're so locked and loaded on that we don't stay ready enough for the pivots that occur in business and in life, right? I think about go back to COVID. We all experienced COVID. And there are so many businesses that didn't make it through the other side because they couldn't pivot because of COVID. They weren't in a position to pivot. And so I think it's important not only for entrepreneurs to prepare themselves and stay in a state of ready and think about all the different nuances of pivoting that may have to happen in their business, whether it's from a positioning perspective of their business or a product, whether it's from a branding perspective, from a visibility perspective, all of these things that have the ability to affect your business, even the slightest, will affect how you monetize or not monetize. And so being in a state of readiness and staying in a state of readiness will help you really kind of ride the wave that is coming or as it comes, right? Being a great surfer is my analogy, right? Surfers are on their boards, they're in the water and they're looking for the wave. And they see it on the approach so they can catch it at the right time and opportunity. And so as an entrepreneur, I think that we need to practice being good surfers because waves come and if you're not ready, they can take you out. They can take you out. But if you're ready, you know how to ride that thing. You can ride it on top. You can go through the funnels and all of those things. The goal is not to wipe out. That's the goal.
It's such a beautiful metaphor. I love this idea of riding the wave. And I feel that your concept around staying ready is really that flexibility and openness when it comes to how we lead our company or our lives. And
Mm-hmm.
it's directly correlated with resilience, because resilience comes when things that aren't expected suddenly happen.
Yeah.
And so it's this ability to, now that this has occurred, how can I stay open? How can I be flexible? How can I pivot and then take that next wave, even though it might not have been the wave that we were expecting or looking for?
Exactly. Exactly. For entrepreneurs, for those that are in their corporate spaces, it's just really being resilient in that way. It allows you to kind of look at where the funding is going. Right now we're seeing, at least here in the US, we're seeing these jobs move from one sector to another. But the focus in the headlines is on the jobs that are leaving the one sector. But there are jobs that are being created, and it's a little quiet right now where those jobs are being created. That's the wave. That's the wave people should be looking for, because there are jobs that are being created, but there are also business opportunities that are being created in those spaces from an entrepreneurial perspective. Is this a product line you should be adding? Is there an enhancement you should be making to an existing product line? Are you watching the signs that are happening in your environment as you are leading your business? And you have to be looking at that all the time and making sure that you have a strategy on from a growth perspective, or maybe it's from an exit perspective. Some entrepreneurs don't think about the exit, but I think that you also need, as you get into business, you need to have a thought process on what is the end goal. Am I looking to pass this on? Am I looking to have this business acquired by someone? Am I growing it and what am I growing it to? And so if you are growing it to pass it on to a child or something like that, make sure the child wants it. Make sure the child wants it, right? If the child, you're doing all this work with the idea that I'm going to pass this to Junior someday, and Junior is like, I don't want that. I want to be, I want to be a Instagram influencer. That will hurt your heart. That will literally hurt your heart. So have a plan and make sure that all the people involved are on board with the plan. But if you're building it to have it acquired, then this exit strategy will also influence how you move in your business and how you grow your business and how you pivot in your business. So making sure that you have that in mind as well if you're entering business. But if you have been in business some time and you don't have an exit strategy, you might want to think about that.
Yes, it's being clear on the actions that you're taking with the result in mind. Begin with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey says.
Yes.
Though in Stephen Covey, I think that's the second habit. I always find it a bit grim, begin with the end in mind, because he starts a chapter with the funeral and what you want people to say. I prefer to think 5 years from now versus the end of my life. If I look back on those 5 years, what will I want to accomplish? What will I want to do, to have done? And I feel that's a little more energizing. It can be useful to have a big overview for your whole life and the vision and the legacy you want. It can be a useful exercise, but that requires a lot of space, I feel, in order to really do that thoroughly. And I prefer the rocking chair version of it, which is imagining in your later years on a rocking chair reflecting on your life. But that's a personal preference. You choose what suits
I'm with you, Katie. I don't really want to think about, my funeral, right? I'll let somebody else think about that. I want to, like, when I'm old and gray, sipping a mint julep, sitting on a wraparound porch kind of girl. So
yes, we're both for the rocking chair version of this exercise. So having that long-term vision in mind. Coming back to this idea of resilience, how can you distinguish, and I'm thinking for an individual, how can they distinguish in themselves the difference between a sustainable, healthy resilience and bouncing back from troubles or problems versus unhealthy, almost toxic, pushing through things? Because from the outside, they can look quite similar. Someone can be high achieving, making progress, they fall and then they pick up again. But on the inside, I feel that there's a difference between how we maneuver a sort of healthy resilience versus this toxic forcing and pushing through.
You're so right, Katie. And I think that for me, when I think about the difference between the two, because to the outside world, it does look the same. On the inside, you've really given, the healthier version of you has really given that space and that time, right? To assess, to feel the feelings, to process all the things before you get up, right? You're getting up with it with an intention versus not even feeling the feelings and just pushing, like white knuckling your way through this thing. If you do that, and I've done it, I've done it, and I've ended up burned out on the other side of it. So I know a little bit something about that, right? You are just sheer willing yourself through it. And I think the one thing I didn't expect is, as a high achieving, high functioning individual, I didn't think I was susceptible to burnout. And so I thought burnout was, other people experience burnout, weak people experience burnout. I might be a little tired, but I'm not burned out. And what I found is that I didn't realize I was burned out until I was actually there in the cradle, in the crevice, looking up, going, how did I get here? What happened? Right. And it didn't happen overnight. It was this constant state of pushing my way through, willing my way through. I just got to do one more thing. I can do this, white knuckling my way through it. And when I looked up and caught the reflection of myself in my kitchen window at 2 a.m., I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. The woman staring back at me was 287 pounds at 5'3". I have had no business being 200 and anything at 5'3". No business. But I was, and I didn't know how I got there. I didn't know how I got there. And so I really had to take the time to really assess how I got there and how I was going to find my way back to me. And it is possible to do that, but it is really important. I try to talk and share with others that it's success. You need to define success for yourself, not living a life based upon someone else's definition of what success looks like or should look like. You need to define it for yourself. And for me, that was really kind of stepping back and going, I've been doing all the things that I was told I was supposed to do, that I've been conditioned to do, and look where it got me. And now I'm going to rewrite the rules, and I'm going to do it my own way, because there's got to be something better than this. And to be at a place where I feel now that I am my healthiest and my happiest, both mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, in all fronts, I've been able to define what success looks like for me and not someone else. And I'm measuring my success with my own stick, not comparing myself to someone else, because I think that's the other downfall that we do, is we compare ourselves to others. And that can not only steal your joy, but your confidence. And so it's really important you're running your own race, and run that race in your lane, because there's no one like you. You are a snowflake unto yourself. You are unique. And what you are doing in this earth and in your business is unique to you. Yes, there are competitors that may be doing something similar, but they're not doing it like you do it. They're not doing it with your special sauce. They don't have I'm going to call it your fried chicken recipe, is what I tell my clients, right? It's my fried chicken recipe, and I can give you all the spices, but when you cook it, it's not going to taste like it does when I cook it, because you don't know how much paprika to use.
Such a gift what you just shared. I think we don't pause often enough to reflect on success. And recently I've been thinking a lot about this, and also about this forcing. And I feel I hadn't noticed how much of everything I did came from force until I decided it wouldn't. And I would still do the actions that I felt needed to be done, but without the same energy behind them, maybe in a slightly different order, maybe in a slightly different way. And when I started to do that, I don't know, expansion, freedom, joy, lightness, all the things I talk about, which I also do feel a lot of the time, but they were constrained slightly, because I think when you run your own business, it begins often from this place of joy and excitement. Often that is the pull and the push to start something. And then somewhere down the line, it turns into this pressure, like a pressure cooker. And I feel if we don't catch it, we burn out, or we quit, or we do it but grind through it and go to that hustle mode. But I think if we do catch it, we fall in love with the business all over again. We think, oh, I don't have to write another article again. I get to write an article. What a joy that I can write. And this morning, I'm actually starting two more books in parallel. One that's more for founders, and the other one that's more about sort of the philosophy behind being too busy all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And this morning I just wrote one, and then the next. Well, one chapter of the first one, and they were super inspired and similar-ish topic, but on the next book, and I thought, wow, what a joy to start my day writing two books and feeling so inspired. But before, maybe a month ago, I would have felt, oh, I have to do this. Oh, I
Mm-hmm.
need to do this. I need to start each day by writing my book. No, I want to start each day by writing my book because it's a joy to start with creativity, and that's when I have the most focus. It's not that I have to, I choose to. And I think as soon as we're able to not just say it differently, but feel it differently, energetically inside of ourselves, that's when things feel lighter,
Mm-hmm.
and that's when it feels more like a joy and not a burden to run your own company, because it shouldn't be a burden. Of course there are tasks we may enjoy more than others, but it shouldn't feel like a hustle and a grind. At least that's my perspective.
No, I completely agree with you. And I think you said the one thing that you said that really resonates with me is the feeling. And so feeling is really getting into the space of what it would feel like with even with my goals. When I write down what I'm hoping to accomplish in 5 years, I want to get into the space of what I will feel like when I accomplish that. Because if I can tap into the feeling, I can pull myself into that. I can draw that unto me because I can tap into that feeling.
That was always the part that was missing for me when it came to goal setting. Very often I would set goals because I thought I had to have those goals,
Mm-hmm.
whether it was financially based or in terms of podcast growth or in terms of amount of speaking engagements. Those were the right goals to have.
Mm-hmm.
And very often they were disconnected from any emotion. And then in my personal life, I would set goals that had a personal feeling behind them. Things like starting to paint again or doing some piano, and I would feel excited and bubbly, and they would happen. And the business ones were more stale and number driven, and sometimes they would happen and sometimes they wouldn't, but they didn't feel as correlated with the emotion. So I have a bit of a change of perspective when it comes to setting business goals. I think it can help to have numbers behind as a sort of guideline, but if there isn't an emotional link to it, then I think it's a lot harder to go for them, especially as an individual. Maybe on a company level with thousands of employees, it gives a direction. But if it's a solopreneur or founder with a small team, there definitely needs to be a strong link with the emotional part.
Yeah, absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. I've definitely noticed that for myself as well. When in corporate, having those number-based goals was easy to provide direction to the organization and get the work done. But in my entrepreneur journey, there has to be a correlation with my emotion. How do I feel when I sell my first this, or how will I feel when, and understanding how that will really resonate for me on an emotional plane tied to that number, right? And so that has really kind of helped propel all the things that I'm doing, is because I understand and I know what it will feel like, and then I can't wait. And sometimes the feeling is even better.
Yes, and one thing that occurs to me now when you're sharing this is perhaps when entrepreneurs or founders set these goals, they don't allow themselves to have an emotional connection to them out of fear that they won't succeed. So let's say they want to publish their first book and they set that goal, and then they start to feel how exciting it would be, and then the fear of it not succeeding comes through. What would you recommend for people who set these goals, but they struggle to emotionally connect with them out of fear that they won't succeed?
Well, I think they need to really reframe their relationship with failure, right? What does success look like? Define what success looks like. If you write the book and publish it, that's success. That can be success. That can literally be what you define as success. If it's I want to sell 10, if I sell 10 books, you get to define what that looks like. It's only a failure if you define it as a failure. For me, when I wrote my first book, I'm like, if I write it and it gets printed, it's a success. Now it's self-published, and it was me in my office. I found that I'm not, it doesn't work for me to sit down and look at a blank screen, but putting my headset on and doing talk to text, that works better for me, with a cup of coffee in my hand and having a whole conversation and someone else doing the typing works. I can flow. But if I'm sitting looking at a blank screen, it's going to take me 15 years to write a chapter. This I know about myself. But the success for me was just in the writing process and getting it published. So what I would say is, you get to define what success looks like. So don't be fearful of doing the thing. Fear, if you never get it out there, then it's a foregone conclusion. It is a failure. So fear can be really blocking, and it just makes the reality just lines up with that. So I have had clients who like want to write a book, but it's never perfect. I'm like, so what's the fear? What is blocking you from doing it? Well, what if I write it and nobody buys it? Well, guess what? If you never publish it, nobody can. So you have made what you're fearing true. And she's like, oh, I don't like you very much right now. That's okay.
Yeah, that's part of being a coach. Sometimes we need to say truth that aren't
Yeah.
always enjoyable to hear.
Yes.
You've mentioned several times this idea of reframing our relationship with failure.
Hmm.
How do we do that? Because I know many people who, like I said, have a crippling fear of failure, or who've gone through failures. And this is linked to our notion of resilience that we've spoken about. And it gets stuck. So we've spoken about forgiving ourselves. That was a key element. Feeling the feelings. So
Hmm.
allowing ourselves to maybe feel the disappointment or the anger or the upsetness. What would you say is another core element when it comes to reframing our relationship to failure?
So the other thing I would say is naming the fear. What is the fear? What am I afraid of? What's the worst thing that could happen? Naming it. And, whether it's they won't buy the product, or I it won't sell. What is the fear? What are you fearful of? And what's the worst that could happen? Like for me, I said this to my mom, and she's because she thought I was crazy going into entrepreneurship, as most mothers do. I said to her, I said, the worst thing that can happen is it doesn't turn out the way I thought. But, and I end up having to go back to corporate. I won't die. I absolutely won't die. So, but it will not, if I don't give myself the opportunity to try, then I won't ever know if I could have. And my goal is to live a life without regrets. I would regret when I'm old and gray, sitting on that porch in my rocking chair, and I look back over my life. I will always wonder if I could have, if it would have. And I don't want to have that regret. And so I need to give myself the opportunity to. And so she just looked at me and she goes, okay, go do. Give yourself the opportunity to. And as long as you won't die doing it, I guess I support. So I am happy to have her support in being on my entrepreneurial journey. But I think it's really important, when you say you are up against fear, name the fear. What are you afraid of? What is the worst thing that could happen? What's the worst thing that could happen? Like, the worst thing that could happen for me is that I would have to go back to corporate, or I just moved to a country that the cost of living is less. And I could sell coconuts on the beach. But what's the worst thing that can happen? And sometimes we're afraid, but we won't name the fear. And we and don't do it in isolation. That would be the other thing I would say. Don't do it in isolation, but with someone that you trust, that you know will give you sound advice as to whether the fear is valid or not. Because a lot of times we are taught the self talk is not good. And so the self talk is not good, Katie. You need to fire the self friend. Get a real one that will really tell you whether or not the fear is valid or help you with the reframing of that fear. Um, I have a great circle of friends that I am able to say, to them what I am fearful of. I'm able to name the thing, and they are able to hold space for me. And then as I work my way through why I'm going to do it anyway, because when I lean into the fear, I always find that my growth is on the other side. My evolution is on the other side of that thing. And so I do it anyway. I do it anyway. And I know that if when I leap, I have a circle of people that will catch me.
Yes, I think that is a core element when it comes to resilience is having a strong group, people, family, friends, coworkers, coaches,
Mm-hmm.
colleagues that we can lean on, because this is something that I learned in my research and my own experience around resilience, and it's that it's not on our own. And it's interesting because we often think of a resilient individual as someone who has these big challenges and somehow they push through, and in our mental image they're all on their own going with the obstacles and pushing through. But in reality, resilience is greatly um, blossoms and encouraged when it comes to being surrounded by other people that can support us.
Mm-hmm.
Dana, we're already approaching our last few minutes. What would you like to leave the listeners with today?
I would like to leave your listeners with just they are they should really lean into their own power and take up as much space as possible. The world really needs them to walk in their authenticity and do the hard thing that no one else is willing to do.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dana. It's been such a joy to have you here on the show today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Katie, for having me. I enjoyed chatting with you.